Welcome to Mom in Mind. I'm so glad you could join me on this episode today. We are going to be hearing from Lynn Wilhite, and she's sharing her story about treatment resistant depression, something that she's still working through today. Lynn is a social worker and mom to a 3-year-old boy. She has suffered from postpartum depression since his birth, but even before that, she was struggling during pregnancy. And so far, no medications have been able to help her in the way that she needs, although there is a little bit of hope from her latest medication. She really wanted to make sure that people out there who are dealing with treatment resistant depression, specifically in the postpartum period, know that there are other people out there suffering as well. She is one of them, and she wants people to know that they're not alone. These conversations are not shared as often, and it can really make people who are still struggling, who aren't getting the help that they need, whether it be from medication or therapy or both, continue to make them feel worse because it's really hard, really, really hard to continue trying to find healing and trying to get back to yourself when all of the things you've been trying are not working the way that you want to, or you get a little glimpse of hope and then it doesn't work again. She created the Instagram page My Journey with PPD as a way to try and reach other moms and partners who may have had a similar experience. Her hope is to bring awareness to the fact that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders don't always have an easy fix, and loved ones really need to support a mother for the duration of her journey. She is going to be sharing parts of her story, which include a hospitalization, trying over 40 medications, and feeling really alone in that journey, having not heard from a lot of other moms who are dealing with a lingering postpartum depression. And for those who haven't yet found relief in their current medications and therapies, it is hard to continue trying to seek out a treatment that can help. And I think it's important to remember that depression is a medical condition. Just like other medical conditions, not every treatment is going to work for everybody. And for some people, there may be complexities that we are not aware of or that doctors are working hard to try and figure out. It is certainly never a matter of just deciding to feel better or snapping out of it or whatever the quips are that people like to throw out at people who are suffering. These are illnesses. It is not a choice, and nobody would ever choose to be going through this. I'm so very grateful to Lynn for coming on and sharing her story. And along with her, I hope that this brings comfort to people who continue to suffer. Let's meet Lynn. Welcome, Lynn. Thank you for being with us and coming on to share your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm extra glad that you're coming on to share your story because I think a lot of people need to know that they're not alone because a lot of people um, have experiences that are similar to yours or maybe parallel in some ways and feel really, really alone in that process. So, yeah, feel free to start wherever you would like with your story.
Okay. 2019, my husband and I were in Chicago, and we were trying to have our first child. And I was on medication already. So I was on an antidepressant and a sleeping medication. And I was working with my psychiatrist to kind of game plan what we would do for pregnancy. And so we were going to stay on the antidepressant and we were going to come off of the sleeping medication. So we were tapering down and we were on the next to last dose of the sleeping medication. And we got pregnant very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so my psychiatrist and I decided to kind of go completely off of the sleeping medication.
Mm-hmm.
That instigated about 2 to 3 weeks of not sleeping.
Oh, wow.
It was crazy. And then that not sleeping instigated the entire depressive episode. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the origins of my pregnancy depression, my perinatal
Mhm.
depression, and then
Mhm.
postpartum depression.
Mhm.
Um, I tried multiple medications during pregnancy. I finally got to see a reproductive psychiatrist in Chicago,
Oh, great.
which was great. And so they were more up to date on what I could and shouldn't take during
Mm.
pregnancy. And so
Mhm.
each trimester, we kind of followed along with current guidelines and stuff like that. Um, and keeping my mental health in mind too. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
Um, Birth was great. Um, that, medically speaking, everything went wonderfully.
Mm.
Healthy baby. The only thing that happened was a lot of babies born to mothers taking SSRIs have neonatal adaptation syndrome. So they kind of are slower to clear their lungs, or slower to cry or whatever. And so my baby was like that. And the NICU team was on standby because they knew I was on those medications. So they basically took him from me as soon as I gave birth and were working on him for about 30 minutes in the room with me, making sure that he started breathing on his own and that he was like body temperature was okay and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was my first taste of mom guilt. I like
Uh,
to tell everyone,
mm-hmm.
because that was the first moment when, everything changed. And I all of a sudden felt terribly responsible for this young
Mm-hmm.
baby and his health situation because it was my
Mm-hmm.
medication that had caused it.
Mm.
Um, so we went home. We had a few good days. My hormones were doing all the stuff.
Yeah.
And then a few days into postpartum, I realized, oh, the depression's still here.
Mm.
Depression hasn't left me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was very clear that it was still there. It was like a thick fog over everything. So I was continuing to work with my reproductive psychiatrist, my therapist, and essentially that brings me to where I am today. 3 years postpartum. I've been on over 40 medications, and I think my message is that healing is not linear.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I love that quote. I
Mm-hmm.
love telling people about that, because yeah, it's not a linear journey.
Right.
It's been anything but a linear journey.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when, some people I want to kind of walk back a little bit to what you were saying, just right after birth and the neonatal adaptation syndrome that um, this is a hard process for a new mom to go through, and that guilt is real. Um, and also, you had to make a decision for yourself, which ultimately is also for your baby, for you to not be depressed and for you to be able to sleep during pregnancy. It's like it can feel like no choice is a great choice, but there might be one that is like a little bit better,
Hmm.
kind of a thing. Um, and I'm sure, like, if you had a reproductive psychiatrist, they probably walked you through what could happen. Obviously, the neonatal team knew, um, but even with that knowing ahead of time and making the best decision you can with the information you have and all of those good things, it's really hard for that to be enough to sway the guilt.
Yep. Yeah, it was, I knew everything. I was ready. Like you said, medical team was on standby. I was in a
Mm,
great hospital downtown Chicago. Like everything was good and the
mhm,
baby was taken care of. And so I
mhm.
didn't need to worry from that standpoint, but the
Yeah,
guilt was just immediate.
right, right. So did like I'm thinking for other moms who've experienced this and had that same guilt for you, was how long did that guilt hang around, like at that intensity?
It's a good question. The guilt hung around for quite a while, but the intensity lessened. And so today, like my son is 3, and I think I've let go of the guilt of the beginning of his life and that situation. Um, but it took maybe the
Mm-hmm.
to first year or two to
Mm-hmm.
really come to terms with what I had chosen and wondering, if it had repercussions in other areas of his life, just kind of snowballing with my anxiety.
Mhm.
Um, so it took a while, but the intensity was the most intense in the moment, in right after delivering in the hospital when he wasn't crying and I was just terrified that he was not okay.
Mhm.
Um, and then once he was okay, it lessened, but it was there, and I
Mhm.
felt I felt bad for maybe
Mm.
about a year or so.
That's really tough.
Yeah.
Like you said, it contributed to your anxiety. So were you, I assume, like a little bit more vigilant or hyper vigilant, maybe looking out for making sure everything was okay and he was developing kind of within the normal range and all that?
Yes, and actually, my son has sensory processing disorder
Mm-hmm.
that we've come to realize, and so I was very hypervigilant because of being guilty, feeling about the medication during pregnancy and the way birth went. Um, so throughout his life, he had colic for the first
Mm.
6 months at least, and everyone kind of said, well, it's just colic, it's just acid reflux, it's just this, it's just that. But I was very hyper vigilant and I was very on guard, and I was
Yeah.
constantly saying, no, I don't think this is a normal thing I'm seeing, or hey, his milestone is delayed. So we finally talked to the pediatrician at 6 months, and he was assessed for state programming and was granted physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that until he was 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, uh, right. So then that I would assume like gives you plenty of opportunities to revisit your guilt.
Yes. Yes.
That's it's just so hard, even if you know the decision you're making is the right decision, to just to kind of make peace with that. That guilt is no joke, especially when you're also still trying to figure out like how to get through your own depression and anxiety, which obviously is also going to magnify your guilt anyways.
Hmm. Yeah.
um that it's a lot. Like you're already suffering,
Yeah.
and then you have to like have that guilt suffering as well.
Yep. Yeah.
It's really really hard.
And I was already, isolated because of the depression during
Mm,
pregnancy, and
mm,
there's already shame associated with depression and with the isolation that comes with that. And so I was already feeling ashamed of myself
mm,
during pregnancy, and I didn't get to celebrate my pregnancy. I didn't
mm.
get to take like maternity photos, and I didn't, I was depressed pretty severely most of my pregnancy. So I
Yeah,
didn't celebrate the pregnancy, and it was just a continuation of that shame and guilt.
for a long time.
Yes, for years.
Yeah. um oh gosh. So what, like there's so many decisions you have had to make throughout the whole process, and that's a delicate balance of making sure that you're as well taken care of as possible, because that's just as important. Um, specifically, like being the kind of the holder of the baby, the vessel,
Right.
the baby's growing in, your health really does matter too.
Hmm.
And when I say health, I mean mental health and health, because right, it all comes,
Right.
it's all in the same body.
Yeah.
Um, so with the your experience of like you were taking a medication prior to pregnancy that was useful and beneficial, and the sleep medication the same thing, then coming off of those, obviously like you said there was a huge problem with not being able to sleep. Once you were able to get back on the medication, um, let me think. Actually, what I want to ask is like what the medication that you used to had taken before, did it have the same benefit after?
It did during pregnancy. Actually, it was one of the only medications that continued to have the same efficacy during pregnancy and postpartum.
Mm,
Um, one of the only ones. I was taking my antidepressant throughout pregnancy, and that was not cutting it anymore. It had been cutting it for years prior.
Yeah.
And then, the slew of other things we've tried. So that was the one thing that going back on that helped sleep. And so that was at least something we could hang on to.
Hmm. Uh, and then what you said 40 medications that
Yes.
you've
I have an
had to.
Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, well, good. You would have to keep track for sure.
Yeah.
Um, just for your own reference, so you can know what helped and what
Hmm.
didn't. But what can you tell me what that process, like the beginning of that process, what that was like?
Yes. Lot more hopeful immediately postpartum. So immediately postpartum, breastfeeding didn't work for us. My son was not a good eater, and he just decided that he wasn't going to eat much at all. And so we realized that we had to give him formula and we had to end up thickening it and all this stuff. So it was better anyway that we gave him formula. So that opened up my medication options
Hmm.
more. And so I was excited and I was hopeful that, okay, I had suffered through this pregnancy with kind of limited medication options. And then postpartum, I was not sure if we were going to breastfeed and all that. So now I was here at this point where I could take more medications potentially and see a benefit. And so
Hmm.
I was very hopeful. And we would try a medication in conjunction with another antidepressant. So, I would take an antidepressant and an antipsychotic, or an antidepressant and a mood stabilizer,
Hmm.
um, and trial it for a month. And if it didn't show any efficacy at all, we would go on to the next one.
Hmm.
And after after doing that for 3 years, you start to definitely lose hope.
Yeah.
And you everyone tells you you're going to heal. Everyone tells you
Hmm.
you're going to get better, and you
Hmm.
want to believe it so bad,
Right.
but it's not working for you. Like, things aren't
Hmm.
clicking for you. And
Hmm.
so you feel like the anomaly and the outcast, and what's going on with me? Is it my fault? Is my body different? Like, what is going on?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a lot of I guess ups and downs.
Yes.
The just dealing with the having the hope and then being disappointed, having to gear up to try again and try something new and try something different. It's exhausting, right?
It is. It is. There's so many side effects that come with each medication
Mhm.
potentially, so
Mhm.
sometimes sleep would be affected, or sometimes appetite would be affected, or just different things that would come along with each medication, and you had to adjust to that for the month that you were trying it, and then
Mhm.
adjust to getting it out of your system when you decided it wasn't working. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of just constant motion and influx, while my son was also growing rapidly and in flux.
Mhm.
It was all kind of chaos.
So, and in the meantime, you don't have relief from
Right.
your symptoms.
Right.
You were, in terms of like the intensity of your depression, how were you doing?
So I think pretty soon after giving birth, I don't remember how soon, I was having suicidal ideations with my
Mm.
depression. So that's kind of the intensity that it got to. I didn't have them every day, but I had them quite often.
Yeah.
Um, and so there were many times that we didn't know what to do with that. We didn't, um, it was truly difficult to go through that and to be a new mother at the same
Yeah.
time, and to think like, I just brought life into the world, but I don't know that I want to be here anymore.
Mhm.
um and I would probably talk about this later, but like the bonding and the attachment, the delayed attachment that happens with when you're depressed, and you
Mhm.
have a new baby, that was. added to everything that made me feel even worse, that I wasn't bonding with baby
Mhm.
right away, and he was crying 24/7 and I couldn't do anything to comfort him. And
Mhm.
um so yeah, it was a mess. So my intensity was pretty intense. Yeah.
Um, so you were, uh, well, actually, I do want to stay with that for just a moment. The attachment stuff we can, I guess, attend to it now because it is super important. Then I'll get back to medication stuff. Um, right. When you feel depressed in that way, um, it's not like you don't. If I can, like, does it? Well, let me restate this. Um, Would you agree that you'd like to be able to connect in the way that you want to, but it's just like feels out of reach?
Yes, absolutely,
Uh-huh.
100%. Yeah.
So it's like its own pain.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You feel, you judge yourself. Again, there's the
Mhm.
shame and
Mhm.
the mom guilt and
Mhm.
the I'm a failure and what's wrong? What's wrong with me? Why am
Mhm.
I not connecting with my baby when,
Mhm.
my friend told me about her birth experience and how it was magical and they had skin to skin right away and she was in love and everything was great. So yeah, it was something that I desperately wanted, but
Mhm.
it just felt like in this intangible thing that I couldn't achieve.
Mhm. And I mean, I think it is, it's also hard just to have a baby who has colic to feel that like connection sometimes anyways, because they're high needs.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of like downtime,
Yeah.
slow time, like
Yep.
quiet time. So that on its own can make it difficult. And so you're then dealing with multiple layers of challenge or struggle
Yes.
at the same time. So I mean, at this point in your journey, pregnancy didn't go how you, I assume, wanted it to. Birth was good, postpartum not so much. Like immediate postpartum. That was really difficult. And so like you're dealing with the depression and I imagine some sadness, like grief type of sadness that this is not what you wanted. This is not how you
Absolutely.
envisioned it.
So much grief. It's grief that I'm grief that I'm still processing today.
Mm,
So much grief. I constantly would cry about the things that felt like they weren't working for me,
right.
and feeling like I was missing out on these experiences that I was thinking my whole life would be attainable. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
going back to the breastfeeding, even, that was a huge issue and huge grief for me around not being able to do that.
Right.
Um, a lot of guilt, all that. And so, yeah, there was so much guilt and so much grief. It was constantly kind of just like, what have I lost? What memories have I lost? What time have I lost? And then trying to, at the same time, keep up with my son, who is rapidly growing and changing and needs a lot from
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the parts that we should be talking more about in general is just how much you've, for you and your situation and other people who uh, are really deep in what they're going through. Um, that what you said before about the memories,
Mhm.
like it is, depression is like being in a thick fog, and it's hard to see and move and let alone remember certain things. Even in the
Yes.
moment, like if you feel like, oh, I'm for sure going to remember this,
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
it just goes,
It's gone.
it's
Yeah.
gone. It's
Yeah.
gone.
I constantly find myself on my phone at nighttime when he's asleep, looking at old photos, old videos, and thinking like, was I there? Was
Mm,
I present for this? Did I
mm,
actually record this on my phone? Because I don't remember this at all, and I don't remember the stage, or I don't remember him looking like this, or anything like that. So yeah, it's almost traumatic how much memory is taken from you with depression.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. For sure. Because you're having to, it's almost like unimaginable that you can't remember it, even though there's evidence you were there. And two, like, I mean, I want to get into the kind of medication trials a little bit more and what that was like. But even at this point, so you've been through so much, and you've already stated that there were times where you didn't feel like being alive at times.
Hmm.
Um, and there's like something pretty amazing. I'm always amazed by like people who are dealing with really severe and intense depression and anxiety that like you you're still trying to go. You're still trying to move forward. You're
Yeah.
still like trying to, okay, let's try this medication. Like the desire to feel better, even if it feels really far away, is still really strong.
Thank you. Yeah, that is something that I think it's hard that a lot of people don't recognize that you're
Mm,
trying that hard for something that feels pretty unattainable at that point.
okay.
Um, and so, yeah, just trying, grasping at anything.
Mm,
Uh, it takes a lot of it takes a lot of trust in your providers, and it takes a
mhm,
lot of trust in the process, and it takes a lot
mhm,
of trust in yourself that you can weather the storm however long it's going to be.
mhm.
But yeah, there were many, many times when it felt like I couldn't keep going and I couldn't try another medication and I couldn't,
Right.
you know, whatever.
Yeah. Um, it's hard. With anything that's a chronic meaning long term, not,
Mhm.
more than a month,
Mhm.
even sometimes more than 6 months. Um, you do want to give up. Not necessarily always like suicidal thoughts give up, but just like uh, it's exhausting to keep trying. Was there a point for you where that kind of took place where you said like I need a minute, um,
Um,
or you wanted to?
I think that point for me would have been around the time I was hospitalized. Um, I it, it was just as hard the whole time. It never got easier, and it never got harder necessarily. It was the same intensity the whole time. But around the time I was hospitalized, um, the thoughts of just not being able to do this anymore, and really like thinking thinking that my son would be truly much better off with a different person caring for him,
Mm,
because I was, as a therapist myself, I think I knew too much, and
mm,
I was thinking, a depressed mother. It's been shown, these studies, a depressed mother is not great for this child, and this it might lead to this or that, and attachment might be poor, and so I was just like snowballing all the time with
right,
anxiety
right.
of what my caregiving was doing to him. And
Mm,
so, yeah, I got to a point where it was like, okay, something has to give. Like, either I'm gone and he's got someone else to take care of him, and that's a good thing, or some medicine has to work, or
mhm, mhm, mhm,
something has
mhm.
to change. And so when that I think that's probably when I was hospitalized, and that was the scariest time of my life.
Yeah. How many months postpartum were you at that time?
2 years.
So you had been like in deep suffering for a long time.
Hmm. Yeah.
I want to come back to the hospitalization that you experienced, and I also hold on. Um, uh, yeah, and I want to understand like what happened before that as well, in terms of like medication trials and um, Yeah, if you can walk through that a little bit.
Yeah. So again, I have the spreadsheet of all the
Mhm.
medications we tried, but we tried every antidepressant, every antipsychotic, every mood stabilizer, and we tried different combinations, and um, we tried, anti-anxiety medications with them and all that because I didn't just have depression; I had major anxiety as well.
Yeah.
And at some point, it was mentioned to me that I had treatment-resistant depression, and that was kind of um, it was hard to hear and to realize and
Mhm.
to accept.
Mhm.
But that meant looking into new options of not just medication, but things that were out there that helped potentially those with treatment resistant depression. So
Mhm.
we looked to ketamine first.
Mhm.
So I tried ketamine. I did like, I think, 6 infusions over 2 or 3 weeks.
Mhm.
Um, didn't work. I think it works great for some, just didn't work for me.
Mhm.
Um, we tried Spravato, um, which is ketamine, essentially nasal spray,
Mhm.
and that didn't work either. Um, so yeah, tried pretty much everything under the sun leading up to the hospitalization,
Mhm.
um, medications and um, different out of the box, I guess, you
Mhm.
know, things too.
Right, just trying to throw whatever you could
Yeah,
at it to see what works and what
yeah.
doesn't. I forgot to ask, did you have like the support of a therapist or anything like that while you're going through all of this?
Yeah, so I did accept, we moved.
Mm.
We were in Chicago when I gave birth, and up until 6 months postpartum, and then we moved to another state, at 6 months postpartum. So
Mm.
I lost my therapist because that was a
Yeah.
different state, she couldn't practice in it, um, and lost my reproductive psychiatrist, so lost everything in the
Oh
thick of
my
everything,
gosh.
and was trying to do my own research using Postpartum Support International's directory and all that to try to
Mm.
find providers near me that were qualified. But it took, quite honestly, it took up until a few months ago to find a therapist that meshed with me and seemed to really understand. And
Yeah.
we can talk about that later, maybe, but just not be intimidated by the severity of the
Mm.
situation.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so I did kind of have a therapist, but there was like a gap there where I
Mhm.
was looking for a new therapist and without a therapist. So that was really, really difficult.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, if your support system is kind of yanked away from you, it's even further disorienting.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, I don't know what kind of like family support you had where you were versus where you went to, and like all of these factors can affect how you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thankfully, the one constant was my husband throughout all this. He was my rock. He continues to be my rock, and
Hmm.
such a good advocate for me,
Oh, nice.
and for mental health in general. So that was consistent, and that's the one thing that stayed, and I could depend on that. Where we moved closer to family,
Mm-hmm.
so we had more options for respite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some time away from the crying and
Mm-hmm.
um, just some time to try to enjoy each other's company again
Mm-hmm.
without
Mm-hmm.
baby.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Um, So going back to like what led up a little bit closer to the hospitalization, what was going on? How did you come to either
Yeah.
know that you needed that or that
Mhm.
somebody knew you needed that?
Yeah. Um, so I was actually just progressively, I was checking in with my the person who was, I think it was a nurse practitioner prescribing at the time, for me, and um, checking in with her either weekly or every other week. It was pretty frequent visits that we were having,
Mm-hmm.
because we were trying to get on top of it, you know.
Yeah.
And she heard the frequency of my suicidal ideations kind of ramping up
Mm.
over a few weeks. Um, so she suggested that I go to the hospital voluntarily and see what they could do for me. I know a lot more now.
Mm.
Um, I think that hospitals save so many people's lives and are so important. Um, for me, it wasn't the right thing at the right time.
Mm.
For me, it created further trauma, and um, they essentially took me off of all my medication, and
Oh,
I was on like next to nothing, which,
what?
and I tried to tell them, I was 2 years postpartum at this point, so I had tried, maybe 30 medications. So I tried to tell
Mm.
them the list of medications that I had tried, and they didn't necessarily listen to me.
Oh
And
no.
I couldn't see straight for 2 weeks because of all the medication changes. And
Oh my
I mean, it was
gosh.
just, it ended up being more traumatic than helpful, which is really disappointing. Like,
Yeah.
we should be able to go to any hospital in our country and get good care.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but that didn't happen.
Right. As I'm kind of making assumptions as you're talking about that there must not have been a reproductive psychiatrist there.
Nope.
There may nobody trained in perinatal mental health.
Nope.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a state hospital, and there was no one trained in anything perinatal.
Wow. So I mean that's just it sucks so much to go someplace to get help and to be there feeling worse. You
Yes.
said 2 weeks?
I was there for 4 days.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Thankfully. Yeah.
Uh, you said something about 2 weeks. I misunderstood that. So in that 4 days, did was there anything that they came to understand that helped? What happened on that fourth day?
Um, I essentially had to tell them that I was feeling better,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I wanted to go home to see my son.
Mm-hmm.
There was no visiting with my son during this time. I was just ripped from him, and um, there was no therapy offered. There was no group therapy. There was just nothing happening.
Mm.
So by the fourth day, I was talking with a social worker, and I just kind of unfortunately told them what they needed to hear, and said, yeah, I'm feeling better. I'm not thinking about hurting myself, and I would love to go home to see my kid and my son, or my kid and my husband. Um, and they understood that that was how I felt and said, okay, and they discharged me. But it feels just not good having to just like play the game, so to speak,
Oh, yeah.
um, to get out when that's the place that I wanted to hopefully find some help.
Right.
Um, so it was really, again, it was really disappointing and really distressing. And yeah,
And then you have to start from square one,
yep.
back on medication.
And
Like
of
the
course,
little bit that you did have that helped, however little
right,
that it helped, was gone.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was discharged with, for example, I have insomnia,
Mhm.
which is something that we've learned recently. Discharged with nothing for sleep and nothing for anxiety. Um, a very, very tiny dose of Zoloft, and maybe one other medication, but it was just, I knew I had had enough experience that this wasn't going to cut it.
Mhm.
That what they were
Mhm.
discharging me with was essentially nothing. And
Mhm.
um, it was, yeah, that was disappointing.
So this was about a year ago.
Yeah. Hmm.
What has happened since then, like with medication, with you and yeah.
So again, continued to trial medications. There's been a few new ones that have come out. Throughout this process, there's been new medications that have come out. So I have tried those as they come out.
Mhm.
Um, Most of them have not worked, but um, one of them is a newer medication, and I started about a month ago,
Mhm.
and it has started to lift the depression fog.
Wow.
Um, it's a little scary to say that out loud because
Yes,
I
yes.
don't want to jinx it, and I don't want to. It's hard for me to believe that it might actually be helping a little bit.
Yep.
Because when you're depressed for so long,
Mhm.
it's like hard to fathom another world where you're
Yeah.
not depressed.
Right?
So, yeah, so this new medication that I've been on for about a month is lifting the fog a bit. It's not a cure-all, it's not perfect. It's not like something that makes everything better all of a sudden, but
Mhm.
it's lifting the fog a bit.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I hear you that it's hard to be hopeful and hard to like trust good things when things have felt so bad for so long too.
Yeah.
That's just a super real feeling and experience. Um yeah. So um I'm sorry that you've had to experience this for so long or at all really, but also for so long and deal with unfortunately like huge gaps and mistakes maybe in our medical system. I don't know how you would describe it. Um, but I would imagine sitting where I'm sitting that that might be a part of, how and why it is. Um, I guess in any ways, like how it much harder it's made your process.
Yes. So I'm currently working with a therapist, just to kind of give you a snapshot. I'm
Mm-hmm.
currently working with a therapist who does EMDR
Mm-hmm.
for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we're focusing primarily on the hospitalization because I have
Mm-hmm.
so many flashbacks daily of the
Mm-hmm.
hospitalization. Um, so that gives you a sense of kind of the impact it had on my
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And the other thing I will say is that again, I went to a state hospital. I didn't know that when I went. I found out once I was in there that it was a
Mm.
state hospital. So they have certain outcomes they need to see, and they need to discharge people feeling better, and that things need to look kind of neatly wrapped up with a bow.
Mm.
And I think that's part of the problem. I
Yeah.
think my case wasn't going to get better necessarily in a acute 4-day stay. I
Mm-hmm.
think there could have been new medication tried. I think if there would have been therapy there, there would
Right.
have been potential for working through some things. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't think that my 2-year plus journey was going to just be resolved in 4 days at the hospital.
Right.
Um, but on paper, it looks like I'm another success story. It
Mm.
looks like I have successfully gone through their program that they are touting in the state as quite a new program that is important.
Mm.
And uh, that's what's frustrating
Yeah.
is that I'm truly, and that I know that I'm not the only one, that I've talked to other people
Right.
since being out, or even when I was in there, that essentially said what they needed to say to get out because it was such a terrible experience and such a
Wow.
terrible environment, and there was nothing helping them, and there was no therapy, just nothing. So many of us on paper look like we
Mhm.
are success stories and products of a great mental health system when we're not.
Oh man, that's really a painful process. Because you were like trying to I mean the like a horrible irony of that you have to lie about feeling better at a place where you're trying to get help in order to get out of the place that's making you feel worse. It's just like mind bending how bad that is.
Yep,
Um, really, really rough. And
yep,
then have to, and then now you have to spend time, effort, energy, money, whatever else to recover.
yep.
Um, oh, it's really, really brutal. And, I think what's additionally difficult is that if you're suffering, you're not going to be the person who's like, you guys aren't doing a good job, or like trying to like, be some like advocate while you're suffering. It's just not possible. So
I
you have to
tried.
like
Yeah,
save yourself.
yeah, exactly, exactly. You have to just like you come first, and you have to save yourself and get out of there.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
can't make a um, make yourself an example for other people, or
Right.
do something to make a
Right.
statement or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think this speaks volumes, and obviously this could be like several episodes long, just of how the medical system. And this, what you're describing, is one of the reasons why people feel afraid to say anything is that they're going to go into a hospital and it's going to be worse. And unfortunately, sometimes that's true.
Hmm.
And it just, we need more perinatal mental health, maternal mental health, IOP programs, and places where people really get it, to avoid all of what you have gone through. Um,
Hmm.
it's just so much to deal with, on top of so much to deal with. Your journey, as we talked about at the beginning, that you're really wanting for people to know that these things happen, that this quote unquote treatment resistant depression happens, and that people like you exist. And like what do you want, people to know and to take away and to hear from what you've been through?
Yeah, I want to finally be heard.
Yeah.
I want to know that there's going to be people out there that hear this and say, "Oh, me too,"
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully stop feeling alone. Because what I was looking for throughout pregnancy and all of postpartum, this entire time, I was going through all podcasts, all the books, all everything. There was no one story that talked about it like this. There
Right.
there was no one that kind of laid it out on the line, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone kind of tends to wrap it up in a neat little bow and says, within a few months on medication with therapy, I felt better,
Mm-hmm.
which is great, and that's the majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, since creating my own Instagram page for this and a blog, I've met and talked to so many moms that have said, here I'm on year 4, I'm on year 5 of my postpartum journey, and I'm feeling you. I'm going through the same thing. So I just want people to know that things aren't always neatly tied up in a bow and pretty, and um, you don't find the right medication right away sometimes, and
Mm-hmm.
things, it's trial and error, and mental health is a ton of trial and error, and you have to stay the course, and you have to hold out hope, and I just hope that other people know that they're not alone when they hear
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story, and um sharing some like really difficult and for traumatic truths of your experience. um it it takes a lot to get to a point where you feel like you can share this, even if you are screaming inside for the whole world to know. um but I just appreciate how that you've come to share this, and um that even while you are in your healing process and healing journey, um that you are coming on here to try and ensure that other people feel seen and heard at the same time that you deserve to be seen and heard as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I wish you the best. I'm
Thank
will
you.
keep you in my thoughts, and I'm hopeful for you, and um, appreciate that you've come on to share. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Please go do find Lynn on Instagram at My Journey with PPD and share this episode with whoever you can. Really, the more we can get the word out about all of the conditions that we talk about on the Mom and Mind podcast, the better off everyone else will be, because these stories are important. They need to be shared and they need to be heard. And there are people out there who haven't yet shared their story who will feel comforted beyond belief by hearing that somebody else is going through the same thing. I thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.